Hi, I'm Dr. Robin Koslowitz, clinical psychologist, parenting educator, and post-traumatic parent. Welcome to the Post-Traumatic Parenting Podcast, where we learn to provide our children with a healthy childhood, even if ours was anything but. Or maybe we had a wonderful childhood, but recent events in our lives have left us reeling. Let's face it, after 2020, we're all post-traumatic parents now. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of Season 3 of the Post-Traumatic Parenting Podcast. Today, I have a guest that I've been dreaming of having on ever since I read his book. We have Eamon Dolan. He is the author of The Power of Partying, which is a book that I both listened to and read because I needed to underline, so I needed to read it as well. He's also been a book editor for 30 years. He's vice president at Simon & Schuster now, and he is also a acclaimed photographer. I've actually seen his photography on his Instagram, and if you are like hungry for really, really compelling images, check it out. So for many reasons, super excited to speak with him today. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Robin, it's my pleasure. Thanks for that very generous intro, and I'm a big admirer of your work, so I'm delighted to talk to you.
Thank you. The Power of Partying, I feel like was a book that really fed into a gap that, prior to your book, I don't think there was really anything about estrangement written in the way that you wrote it. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey to the book?
Sure. First of all, I agree with you. I estranged from, I was abused extensively in childhood, as were my sister and brother, mostly by my mother. Physical abuse, psychological abuse, and neglect. And the psychological abuse continued well into my 40s. And I ultimately made a decision that we'll talk about today to step away from her. And it was difficult, it was complicated, but it was also one of the 3 best decisions I ever made. I really found joy and peace like none I could have imagined before. And as you say, I'm a book editor, so my first instinct is always to look for a book to help explain anything to me. And to my surprise, I found books on estrangement, but I couldn't find any that mirrored my own experience with it as an essentially positive experience. And I also, as a book editor, I get to ask great writers to write books on topics that interest me. So I spent 3 years looking for such a writer, either a professional, a therapist, or a psychiatrist, or just a wonderful journalist. And I couldn't find anybody. I asked literary agents, I went on Google Scholar, I did the things we always do. And then one day, 3 years in, an agent friend of mine said, you should write it yourself. And initially I laughed him off, but that weekend I went home and I started writing this book.
Yeah, I feel like the best books are the books where the author was looking for the book that they needed. I know for me, post-traumatic parenting, I really was looking for what is the impact of trauma on a baby? Like, how do I explain flashbacks to my 3-year-old? Yeah. How can I explain to my kids why I can't be in crowded spaces or why I don't sleep at night? And there was nothing. Like prior to 9/11, I don't think anyone realizes this. Nobody was talking about trauma. It was like the stepchild of psychology. We spoke about anxiety and OCD and depression. Trauma was not really this like major topic. Like the Body Keeps the Score hadn't been published yet, right? It wasn't this topic that people spoke about. And I basically wrote the book that I was looking for 27 years ago when I was pregnant because it just didn't exist. And I just think the best books come from that journey.
It certainly is part of my day job. It's one of the motivations that I look for in an author of nonfiction, indeed in an author of fiction as well, that they're fulfilling a need that they themselves feel. And it helps them to know what the reader wants because they're the reader. And it worked in your case, and I hope it worked in my case as well.
Yeah. And, in your book, what was, I guess you really found a community once you wrote the book, right? So many people reached out to you and spoke with you. What was the most surprising thing you found, either when researching or when talking to people?
I found 2 couple of closely related things. One, there were so many of us, so many more than I thought, and statistics vary, but someplace between a quarter and a half of people are estranged from a relative. And again, numbers vary, but probably someplace in the same region of people have been abused by relatives. And that, the prevalence of it surprised me. Also, what surprised me is how isolated we all felt. I talked ultimately to about 36 other survivors, and so many of them said to me, you know, you're the first person I've really spoken about this with. I haven't even told my husband about it. And it was heartbreaking on one level, but also we bonded very quickly, myself and my interviewer subjects, because we were sharing with each other stuff that we hadn't been able to share before. And it was, again, it was heartbreaking, but it was also on some level inspiring to know that there were just so many of us out there who needed to hear the message that they would find in this book.
Yeah. Do you think, what's the reason why people don't talk about this more? Is it shame? Is it societal pressure? Is it scars from childhood? Like, why don't people really
I think it's all of those
it?
things that you just mentioned, and probably even more. I doubt that there is another human experience whose prevalence is so underestimated as the two closely entwined experiences that we're talking about today: abuse in childhood, and then the possibility of estrangement as an antidote to that abuse, a tool in the healing from that abuse. Isolation is a big part of it. We all grow up thinking that whatever we experience in childhood is normal. That it's normal to think that. So we're, to a certain degree, we're predisposed to think that whatever happens to us is the norm. And then our abusers, whether they're siblings or parents or whoever, for a variety of reasons, reinforce that isolation. They don't want us telling on them. They don't want to share us with anybody else. For one reason or another, isolation is a prominent feature in abusive circumstances, and that's part of what prevents us from understanding. And then, of course, with isolation, almost always comes shame. We look at the rest of the world and we think, well, you know, what's wrong with me? I'm not like them. There must be something wrong with me. And in the case of abusive backgrounds, we have been made to think that we're the problem, and often blaming ourselves is initially it's a coping mechanism. Weirdly, it's adaptive at the outset, and then it becomes maladaptive. But it's one of the few ways that we have to give ourselves the illusion of some control over our lives. If we buy into their propaganda that we're bad, that we're lazy or whatever, then we can think to ourselves, well, if I could just become less lazy, if I could just make the team, if I could lose the weight, if I could get that part in the school play or whatever, then they might like me and I might be better. And again, it's an illusion, but it is something, and it perpetuates our sense of shame, but it arises out of a need for some sense of control over our young lives.
And I want to go back to what you're saying about how it was adaptive. I think it's very true that, you know, in my book, I talk about the trauma app in our brain. And the trauma app always is an adaptive, you know, it's an adaptation that our brain creates to keep us alive. And in fact, in therapy, that's the first thing I always ask is when someone talks about a behavior they don't want to engage in anymore, or, you know, something that they struggle with, I always go back to, in what context would this have been adaptive? Like, in what context would it be adaptive to, you know, people please somebody who's yelling at you, to say yes when you mean to say no? In what context would it be adaptive to lash out at somebody? In what context would it be adaptive to, you know, dissociate and just not be there? And when we start from that place, we very often can understand it. And I also think another thing you're saying that's very correct is, the innocence of childhood, right? Our job as the adult's job when we're children is you need to explain the world to me. Like, what's that weird white stuff falling? Is it dangerous? Is it good? Why is there red stuff coming out of me now that I fell down, right? Like, when you're 2, it's mom's job, it's dad's job to be like, oh, you just scraped your knee, that's blood, we'll put on a Band-Aid, you'll be okay, honey, that's snow, it's fun, but we also have to wear a coat. So of course, if they say the reason you're being treated this way is because you're lazy, or because you're fat, or because you're ugly, or because you're stupid, you know, why wouldn't you believe them? You believe them about the snow, you believe them about the concept of gravity, so why, or about germs that you can't see, but, you know, right? So why wouldn't you believe them that, you know, you deserve this maltreatment because you're, like your mom said, because you're disobedient?
Yeah.
Like, we have no defense, really, as children.
I mean, it's psychological, but I think, again, it's also neurological. We are wired to believe these people, which is why parents have such an obligation to not mislead us in these regards or in other regards as well. It is on them.
Yeah. It's certainly on us in the post-traumatic parenting community to present
As parents,
the most healed, you know, version of ourselves that we can to our kids. That's, you know, in the book, people, you know, I talk about this all the time, this idea of self-care is childcare. Because when I heal, I take care of my kid. Like, my hour in therapy is directly me parenting my children, even if my children are with a babysitter right now, because I am building a mother for them.
Yeah. I love that equation that you make between self-care and childcare. And I would say that I became certainly a better father, a better partner, a better friend after I went through the estrangement process that I talk about in the book, because I was less wrapped up in my own perceived flaws, and I could be more there for other people and for myself.
Could you have sort of reprogrammed your own trauma app had you remained in contact with your mom? Did you try to do that at first? Like, what was that process?
Yeah, I did try to do that at first, and I love your metaphor of the trauma app. I did try to do it at first, and in fact, you could say I spent 40 some odd years trying initially, and then I, you know, sort of subconsciously, and then I spent 2 years trying consciously to make the relationship work. Those 2 years that I mentioned it came in the wake of realizing that this relationship that I had with my mother, who was my primary abuser and whose psychological abuse continued into my 40s, I realized that relationship was the most harmful relationship in my entire life, that nobody else in my life treated me the way that she did. And that with the help of my therapist, I realized that something had to change in that relationship in order for it not to harm me so much anymore. And I describe a process in the book that I sort of happened upon. I did it mostly right entirely by accident, because subsequently I've talked to researchers and I've talked to other survivors, and it seems that the process I went about was the right way to go. The first thing I did was thought about how my mother treated me in relation to how everyone else treated me, what the differences were, what the harmful differences were. And I also did this in isolation, in the right kind of isolation. I realized somehow that the first thing I needed to do to get perspective was to step away from her. Not in any permanent way, but just to take a break. Because my sister and I had this system set up where one of my parts of the duty was to talk to my mother on the phone every day, just to sort of let her blow off her steam, so my sister didn't have to get burned by all of it. But I took a few weeks off, and I really started to get perspective. First of all, I just didn't hurt so much anymore, and I didn't realize that what I was feeling was pain until the pain was no longer being inflicted on a daily basis. I also got perspective. I really got to think about, okay, how would I change this relationship in order for it not to hurt me anymore? Or how would I ask my mother to change the relationship so it wouldn't hurt me? What I ended up doing was coming up with rules. And one of them was no cruelty towards me or anybody else in my presence, no cruel comments, no cruel actions. Another was no tirades. She has a lot of abusive parents relatives do. She could go on for an hour about my flaws or what was, how the blacks were ruining everything. What she had a quite a playlist.
Whatever her
So
grudge du jour was. Yeah.
yeah, precisely. And so I set these rules. I set them down as rules. I had a couple of other big ones, and I, gathered together my courage and I presented them to her. I said, if this, our relationship is, here's what you've done wrong to me, and it's stuff that no one else has done to me. And if our relationship is going to continue, these are the rules that you would need to abide by. That was a really difficult conversation. It did not go the way I intended.
Must have been terrifying.
So scary, I have to say.
Yeah.
But it was the first step. I never had a conversation with her again that was as scary as that first one. I had a lot of scary conversations with her before I decided to step away. And that, again, I changed my own approach in order to give her a chance to change her approach. Something had to give, she had to give, and I gave her, I'd say, several hundred opportunities over 4 years. Pardon me, over 2 years to do that.
Can I point out how incredibly respectful that is? When you have difficult people in your life, one way that you can manage them is you sort of like, you downgrade them from main character to almost like a prop on the stage, right? Where it's like an obstacle the main characters have to navigate around, right? So you have, very often I use the great Aunt Bertha, right? Like great Aunt Bertha, who's never going to change, and the way she talks and whatever. We don't really engage with her. We just sort of manage. I actually teach people this, these 4 techniques for the great Aunt Berthas in the world, where I say you can go over, under, around, or through. So under is nowadays, parents don't spank their kids enough, and the reason your kid is so wild is you should spank him more. You put him on Ritalin, you didn't put him on Ritalin, right? Whatever you did wrong. And where you're just like, Aunt Bertha, I love that you love me, right? I see how much you love me and how much you care about me, because I'm not going to convince some 80-year-old woman to change her views. I don't want to engage because I'm not treating her like a person. I'm treating her like an obstacle. I could go over and I could say, what should I say to someone else if they ask me about my recent divorce, or, whatever the issue is. Around is you distract them and you sort of say oh, the spread here is so good. Look at all this food. Oh, the bride looks beautiful, whatever. And, through is you sort of set the boundary and you say, this is not a way that I'm going to talk to you, right? Through is really the only respectful thing, because I'm being honest with you. I'm treating you like a person who does have the ability to change. The other 3 are not really respectful. I'm not really engaging with you as a human. I'm engaging with you as an obstacle, which is fine. Sometimes that's what I'm going to do with a difficult person. I'm just going to, I'm not trying to fix this relationship. I'm just going to, but so many people talk about your book and say it's disrespectful to parents. It's actually incredibly respectful to give another human feedback and give them the chance to repair.
That's marvelous, Robin. First of all, I love those 4 approaches. And I agree with you that the respect went both ways. I was respecting my mother enough, and I really did respect her at that time. I will say, once I stepped away and realized that she never could change, that she was a broken person, I didn't think of her in terms of respect, but I was done with her after a certain point. But I did come with the hope that she could change, and to have hope for somebody is a form of respect as well. But the respect, as I say, went 2 ways, because I was showing myself a kind of respect that I had never done before, and that was empowering to me. And I had this dim glimmer of a realization that has grown over the years, that I had to be true to myself in this basic way, and I would be true to other people at the same time, even if those were tough truths.
Yeah. I had a similar process. I have an abusive relative, not a parent, who really was a force in my childhood, someone who really gave me a lot of very negative, narratives about myself. I was in therapy once, and my therapist had said to me, she told me to read something, and I didn't get around to reading it. And that week I came in and she said, did you read it? And I said, oh, I was too lazy to. And she's like, Robin, I'm stopping you right there. You are the least lazy person I know. You are a PhD candidate, you work full time, you're raising children, you're doing grant funded research, you're trying to get your black belt. I mean, like you are really not lazy. Where did you get this concept that you're lazy? And I was just like, oh, it's just a figure of speech. And she's like, Robin, whose voice is that? And she wouldn't let me go on, which sometimes our therapists can be annoying that way. The customer is sometimes always wrong, right? In that sense. And she just wouldn't let me go on. And I realized whose voice it was. And she said, you've talked about this person. You don't respect this person. Do you really want this person to have a voice inside your head? And that was like the first time I thought of this idea in my book that I call the trauma app, right? Which is like a trauma adaptation where someone else's voice can be downloaded. Like you said, it's neurological. No. And then I had that other experience where actually that person, I didn't know it at the time, put me in silent treatment. So that person, instead of calling me daily, stopped calling me for a while. Mm-hmm. And I was feeling really good and like therapy was working better. I was just going through a good time. And then it became my birthday. And I realized that that person didn't call me. And I was like, okay. Then that person had some milestone in their life and they didn't tell me about it, which was unusual. And one of my siblings was like, oh, well, this person you're in silent treatment. That person hasn't been talking to you for a few months. And I was like, do you remember the old story about Briar Rabbit? Like, don't throw me in the briar patch. I was like, this punishment is working so well. I am doing great. I think we should continue it. I'm just benefiting. Thank you for this discipline. This is great. And that gave me that pause to say, do I want this person to have a voice in my head? And after that, like you, I had that conversation of saying, I won't be called a derogatory nickname. I won't be yelled at. If you have feedback to give me about my behavior, you have to stop and allow me to respond to you because often there's an answer and an explanation. And you can't, I forgot what the last thing was because, you can't just show up at my house without texting first and telling me that you're coming. And this person said, if you're doing something wrong, I can blast you out whenever I want to. Like, okay, I guess then we'll continue your silent treatment. That's not me estranging. That's me setting a boundary.
Yep, that's exactly right. And there's a lot of great stuff in the situation you just described. First of all, it taken with my description that just preceded it, it shows that there are so many different ways to estrange and so many different levels of estrangement. It is not black or white, all or nothing. And you can move back and forth over the course of time. I think one of the myths about estrangement that scares some people away from it is the notion that, I've got to cut off. As it happens, that's what I did with my mother after 2 years of effort. But a lot of people have, taken an approach like the one you described with Great Aunt Bertha before, where you just give her, polite small talk or you just engage at certain times of the year. And if they improve their behavior, you can move away from estrangement and back towards a relationship. Another thing that I love that you brought up is this notion that they are that the silent treatment is sometimes the best thing they can do is step away from you, and the estrangement often begins with the person they're nominally estranging from. There's I quote this great Australian researcher Kylie Aglias in my book, who makes the point that often emotional estrangement, as it's called in particular, begins with the parent or parents in particular, but it could be other kinds of relatives as well. They're pulling away from us emotionally first when we're 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 years old. And then we just complete that process decades later when we realize that this relationship is not working for us and we're being treated wrongly.
Yeah, I feel like so many post-traumatic parents, it is so complicated, right? Because there are so many narratives in society about blood being thicker than water, about your children deserve grandparents, about, family unity. And I think that fear that you spoke about, that's so true because it is a scary thought that, wait, if this family was built on something like abuse, then who am I? Where do I come from? Where do I belong?
Yeah. And am I just the the projection that they have created? Am I just the faulty, flawed creature that they have always told me I am? And
Yeah.
this is why I think stepping away initially just to get some perspective can be so useful, because just if you may still have their voice in your head, and in fact that inner voice that you brought up to me is one of the surest indications of psychological abuse. If you hear that voice persistently berating you and telling you bad things about yourself, that's not the same voice that tells you to be nice to other people or to leave a tip, at the coffee shop. That's a voice that's just insulting you, basically.
Yeah.
But if you can step away from the person who's actually implanted that voice, you begin to feel things about yourself, see things about yourself, feel feelings that you have not had access to before. And that can happen even over the course of a few weeks.
Yeah. And I think it's so
You begin
true.
to
It
find
goes
out who
back.
you are when you
Yeah.
start to have those feelings and access those emotions and those
Yeah.
understandings.
Yeah. I think like I'm going back to a story in your book where, the Christmas gift of the harmonica, where
It
your
was an
mom gave you a
accordion, even
harmonica.
worse.
It's accordion, sorry.
I would have
Accordion,
loved the
sorry. I'm
harmonica.
projecting.
No worries.
And you didn't want an accordion. You didn't need an accordion. But then you were like selfish and ungrateful and disobedient for not practicing with the accordion and becoming a star on the accordion. Tell me about that story.
Sure. So I was 9 years old at the time, and I really wanted for Christmas a set of toy race cars called accelerators. And I'd see ads on TV. I'd see circulars, in the Sunday paper, advertising sales on accelerators. And I'd bring them to my mother, and I'd say, "Look, Caldor is having a sale." And she'd take them from me, and she'd say, my parents, my neighborhood that I grew up in was all off the boat Irish. So my mother had an Irish accent. She said, "You'll love what I'm getting you for Christmas." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is going to be great."
Yay.
So Christmas morning comes, go into the living room. There's a big accelerator size box, and you gave it away. I didn't know at the time. I thought for sure this is accelerators, and I was so excited. And my heart dropped, my face fell when I opened it up, and it was this massive accordion. And I knew right away that what my mother wanted me to do was learn to play the accordion and play Irish, song ballads and jigs and reels on this contraption, and so that she could show me off to the relatives and to the neighbors. And I had no desire to play. First of all, the thing was vast. I mean, it came up to like here on me. I couldn't see over the top of it. And I realized pretty quickly that this thing was going to be just like an albatross around my neck, literally, for years to come. And this was this very efficient device that she purchased that would guarantee me nothing but unhappiness and shame for the next couple of years, until eventually I was able to give it up. And it was this, she could always berate me for not being good enough at it. She could put me, when company came over, I'd have to haul out the accordion and play some terrible version of some song. And no one was enjoying this. Like the company wasn't. They were rolling their eyes as well. So it was a kind of a low impact torture device.
Yeah. The gift that keeps on taking, right?
Yeah, well said. And of course, a lot of, abusive relatives have other ways of doing this, pressure to get on the team or pressure to get into the school play or, stage mothers, stage fathers, that kind of thing, which I talk about in the book as well. There are tons of ways that people, you have to come home with all A's or, or else. So there are tons of mechanisms that these people can use to subjugate us, basically.
Yeah, and then if you don't appreciate the gift, you're ungrateful. Like she wins no matter what, because if you become this perfect little accordion player, she gets to show off and get praise as a good mom or whatever, and she gets to hear the songs she likes to hear. If you don't practice, she gets to tell you how ungrateful you are. Like no matter what, like heads she wins, tails, you lose.
I lose.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, and that's exactly how it played out.
Yeah. I see that also as a key. And like when I talk to people, if like every time you have an achievement, instead of celebrating it, you're like, whoa, dodge that bullet. that suggests, for me, anytime I got a good grade in school, it was like, oh, I wasn't lazy this time, as opposed to maybe, perhaps, and that goes back to this particular relative of mine telling me, I remember the first time when I was 4, he would actually tell these stories about, he would create this character, this like lazy Mary character from like the poems, and he would tell all these stories that were about me. Like one time lazy Mary didn't clean up her toys, and like I was lazy Mary. 4-year-olds aren't lazy.
No, 4-year-olds aren't lazy, they aren't cruel, they aren't disobedient, they're just being 4 years old.
Yeah.
And to be mistreated the way you were and the way I was, for, you know, whatever sins we were accused of, is a form of abuse.
Yeah. And I think for me, I just want to say I had the privilege of, I didn't have abusive parents. I can't even imagine the psychological, like the level of worseness it would have been if it would have been a parent, because our brains are just built to believe our parents. And, you know, so like, it must have taken years for you. I know you wrote in the book about people pleasing and about asserting yourself. It must have taken years for you to really like see yourself as like Eamon who deserves to be liked for himself.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. In fact, I was just thinking about that as you were describing, pardon me, your situation growing up. You know, part of what happens in a lot of abusive households is isolation of one sort or another. And part of that isolation is that we're never properly socialized. There was neglect in my household too. So it was kind of like, you know, the being raised by wolves. So I would go to school and, you know, I'd wear the same clothes several days in a row. And I didn't know how to make small talk. And you know, I was unwashed because we only had our bath on Saturdays. And, you know, I don't blame the kids at this school, but it took me really until, you know, 10th grade until I figured out just the basics of, you know, small talk and hygiene. And then when that happened, and I started to have friends, my mother called them my so-called friends, as if they somehow it wasn't genuine, these friends. And that's I held on to that for a long, long time. I thought either that the people who were kind to me were either doing it out of pity or doing it out of charity. And I didn't really come out of that misunderstanding again until after I stepped away from my mother.
Yeah. It's very hard. And I think for a lot of children who grew up in trauma, whatever the trauma was, because I grew up in a very different form of trauma where I had a very critically ill parent who had many heart attacks. You know, ultimately, as I say in my TEDx talk, he died in my arms when I tried to perform CPR on him, which left me with incredible perfectionism, right? Because I was Robin, the girl whose mistakes kill people. And so growing up like that, when you're growing up in a situation where you're impacted by trauma, you don't learn social skills. I feel like social skills is like that hidden, that hidden lack of capacity that we have in traumatized childhoods that nobody recognizes. I spent my elementary school years in Narnia, I was on another planet. I was reading. I brought a book to school at recess because books were predictable. Mm-hmm. You can't fail at reading a book. The book is never going to reject you. The book is never going to look at you oddly when you make a comment. And it's stressful to be in class. And I also had that pressure to bring home good grades because my dad was very sick and he really appreciated my good grades. So I had that sense of like, I needed to get that 100. So class time was very, very stressful. I needed to decompress during recess. Jump rope with the other girls was not going to decompress me. No. So... And I never learned how to navigate girl world. I never learned girls are, the first word of girl world, is that idea that you can be as mean as you want as long as you're nice. I'm a very direct person. I'm not good at that. Right. So it took me till, like you said, it actually took me till 10th grade to figure out those social skills. It's funny. I wonder what it is about 10th grade because I also made friends and figured out social skills in 10th grade.
What a grade that 10th grade is.
Yeah, I don't know what it is,
it just took us, 14, 15 years of observation, close observation. Because it took me that long to just, again, to figure it out. Frankly, it might partly be about the other kids too. Like maybe by that age, boys anyway, they maybe get a little bit less judgy, a little bit more open-minded. Well, one way or the other, it wasn't until after I was able to step away from my mother that I really was able to give my relationships, my romantic relationships, my relationships with friends, my relationship with, maybe not my relationship with my son, we can talk about that, but those other relationships, I don't think I gave them 100% because I just didn't trust that people actually really liked me for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very real. I remember a conversation with my abusive relative about how my friend in high school, a lot of the way I made friends also was it was a very academic school and I was a very good student.
Mm.
So my abusive relative was, talked about how you, you know, people don't like smart girls basically, right? Like girls are supposed to like get good grades but not be smart. So, oh, your friends are coming over but not because they like you but because they want you to like tutor them for the test, right? They're getting something out of you. When in retrospect, some of those people I'm friends with till today, and yeah,
Yeah.
I was always the more academic one. I'm a good teacher, but that's not why they were my friend. But it took until adulthood, until healing, and until that perspective of I don't want your voice in my head for me to be like, no, these people like me for me, right? There were some people who didn't like me for me, but there were people who liked me for me because I am likable.
Yeah. And related, closely related to that is we're made to think that those friendships, those relationships, pardon me, are transactional. And because our relationships with our abusers are transactional. They want something from us. We can never give them as much as they want. There's a black hole aspect to what they're demanding of us. But we think if we can just do this or say that we'll get in return what we actually deserve. But that can make us think that other relationships are transactional too, in the way that you were told these people just wanted your smarts,
Right.
so they could ace that test. And it's not true. Relationships are much more nuanced. The good relationships are much more nuanced and complicated and intricate in the best sense. That the transactional element doesn't exist in a good relationship. There is give and take. You give and you get. But
Right.
You're not thinking about, I got this, so I'm going to give that, and vice versa.
Right. It's not, shop right. It's not like, here is $4,
Let's make a
give me a
deal.
pound of cucumbers or whatever, right? Do you identify yourself as a post-traumatic parent? Like, do you see that?
I
Is
do,
that
yeah.
something that resonates with you?
Very much.
In your book, you talk so much about physical discipline of kids, and you really I feel like you go on a soapbox, which is great, about how we've institutionalized abuse when it comes to spanking. And I feel like that also gave you some clarity, like when you had your son. Did you ever feel tempted to spank him?
Not once. And I would say that, I would not say that that's because I'm some sort of super dad. I would say that just instinctually, I never felt that itch in my hand to hit Oscar, my son, even when he was at his most frustrating or, obstreperous or disobedient.
Right.
That was one of the very first revelations I had that sort of started me on the road to stepping away from my abusive parent. My conservative estimate is that she beat me 1,000 times, and my siblings too, when we were children.
Ouch.
And that she could do 1,000 times what I couldn't imagine doing once to my child it didn't make me feel like some superior being. It made her feel to me like an alien species. And my dad, who didn't beat us, but who didn't protect us either. He was an enabler. He was very absent. I felt something similar about him. I could no more imagine not stepping in to protect my child. And that really, on a very, very instinctual level, made me think differently about my mother in particular.
Yeah. It's so true. You hear that, right? Like, oh, one day you'll have kids and you'll understand and you'll see, but
Yep.
okay, I have kids. And, we have strong feelings in post-traumatic parenting community about this also, because so many of us were raised with the various ideas of like spare the rod and spoil the child. And, that somehow this is a religious obligation, that it's a societal obligation, that it's cultural in various cultures. A post-traumatic parenting community member once told me that her kid said to her, Mom, do you know in the olden days they used to hit their kids when their kids didn't listen to them? And Mom's like, the olden days meaning like my child, like
Exactly.
like 20 years ago. But we actually had in the post-traumatic parenting community, there was a mom who absolutely believed it was her religious obligation to spank her kids. She was a single mom. She had a lot of stress in her life. I firmly believe that when we want to hit our kids, it's our inner child parenting our real world child. Like 5-year-old me that just wants to hit and shove the way 5-year-olds do, just wants to hit you right now because like 5-year-old me doesn't have the capacity of adult me. So 5-year-old me just wants to have a temper tantrum basically. So in the post-traumatic parenting class, there was this mom who said she firmly believes in physical discipline, and the other moms were getting very triggered by her. And I tried an experiment because I knew that arguing with her wasn't going to work. So I said, I just want to try this experiment. I'm a child psychologist. It's probably unethical for me to say, but here's what I'm going to say. If your kid does something and you feel the need to spank him, I want you to write it down. And if 24 hours later you believe that spanking him is indeed the right way to handle it, you have my sanction to spank him, which probably I had an ick feeling when I said it, but I knew there was no other way. Let's try this experiment for a week. She went home, and this is a single mom, very like living in very restricted circumstances, not a lot of money, a lot of stress on her, working 2 jobs, sounded like a kid blessed with more than the usual amount of energy. So he did something where like he threw his tablet across the room and the screen cracked, and she doesn't have the money to fix it. And she really felt the urge to spank him. And she wrote it down, like what we said. She came back to class a week later and she said, not once did I actually spank him, because every time 24 hours later, I had a better way of teaching him that lesson. Like, you cracked your tablet, we're just going to have less screen time now because like your tablet's cracked. So until we can put together the money to fix it, you're not going to be using screens. Like, and that was a much more educational interaction between them than spanking him would have been.
Yeah,
and she didn't need to spank him once.
That's brilliant. So my hat's off to her. My hat's also off to you. I mean, there's a couple of things going on there, it seems to me. One, the notion that your inner child, that your parents' inner child was parenting you, is really striking to me. That I do feel that, you know, I was basically raised by a 5-year-old. And of course, a 5-year-old isn't very good at impulse control. And I think this is true of a lot of abusive circumstances in general, and you did this great thing. You stepped in and you created a way around the impulse, a long way around the impulse that made them think about their actions. And that was incredibly therapeutic, I imagine. The other thing too is it allowed the mother, to come up with a consequence that suited the occasion. You know, the punishment fit the crime. The punishment was not disproportionate to the crime. It's so important to have consistent boundaries that are relevant to the rewards and punishment that are relative to what actually the kids do. And to beat a kid for almost anything is not it's out of proportion to whatever the kid might do, especially when they're 4, 5, 6 years old. And it creates a very chaotic circumstance. And what you were helping her do is impose a kind of order that kids need desperately for their safety and their development.
I think sometimes they set up this false dichotomy where it's like, anyone who doesn't believe in spanking doesn't believe in discipline. But like the word discipline, like you said in the book, comes from disciple, right? Like if my son, I have a 4-year-old son, he's not great at impulse control. If he's throwing toys and he's throwing his hard Playmobil toys, it's time to say, I guess we can't play with toys with hard edges right now, right? Until your throwing hands are ready. And then we'll take out a basket of soft scarves and soft balls. And like, here's the throwing basket. We're going to put the hard edge toys away and you can throw from the throwing basket, right? Your throwy hands need throwy things. Here are the throwy things. That's teaching him something, right? What would I be teaching him if I spanked him? Like, how would that teach him the lesson that sometimes we have an impulse in ourselves to do something really like energetic, so let's channel that impulse. Maybe that will turn into becoming an artist one day, right? I'll take that frustration I feel, or that anger, or that silliness, or whatever, that exuberance, and I'll use it for something good. That's what I want to teach him. What do I teach him if I hit him? Like, it doesn't even make sense from like a child development neurological perspective.
No, it doesn't. And I think there are 2 possible reactions within the child. One, if you beat them, they're going to beat themselves up.
Yeah.
And either by internalizing or by externalizing, either they act out or they hit other kids or do other, or they just, they don't understand quite why they were treated the way they were, why they were beaten, except that they know that they were really bad.
Yeah.
And again, factually speaking, no kid is really bad.
Yeah.
It's just not possible. But that's what they think. And those two, I talk in the book, one of the things that was puzzling to me about abuse and its impact is there are so many different impacts, and they seem so different from each other. They have eating disorders, but they're either overeating or they're bulimic, or they're the school bully, or they're acting out, or they're so shy and retiring and dissociative that they basically disappear into the woodwork. And what I realized is that it was the extreme nature of the responses is what united them. I call it silence and violence in the book, just as shorthand. And that these kids, unless a great parent like you or a good parent like me comes along and helps the kid figure out ways to manage these impulses of theirs, throw the soft toys instead of the hard toys, do without a screen until we can afford to get a new screen. Until they learned all that the emotions that happen in that middle ground, they are going to go to either one end of the spectrum or the other, silence or violence. And those kind of black and white extremes they trap a lot of people for their whole lives.
Yeah. And I think in the book you talk so much about tapping into the power of your emotions as opposed to going to silence or violence, like your anger at like, Mom, you cannot treat me this way. You cannot use this language towards me. Like that's a boundary, right? That's anger is what, for those who aren't as conversant with this research, anger is what identifies our boundaries and what gives us the energy to enforce them. And like that you stopped being afraid of your anger and you stopped being afraid of your fear. And instead you said, okay, these are giving me wisdom. Let me take this message, right? You can't do that when you're going to silence or violence.
Right. And it wasn't until I stepped away from my mother that I realized that I even felt what I now recognize as anger. And it felt so, just as you said, just so energizing. And also I understood it pretty quickly as informative. It was telling me that something was being done to me that should not be done to me. And it was also giving me the impetus to do what I could to change that thing, either by removing myself from that situation or by calling out the person who is producing that situation. And that was something I had never been able to do before. I think a lot of our emotions get shunted down. We don't know how to manage our anger. Either we tamp it down entirely or we just let it out all the time. And again, it's silence and violence. And the idea that you could actually use it. And also I did make it, I have a whole section in the book called The Joy of Anger, because it did lead to joy, because it helped me figure out the things I needed to do and gave me the strength to do those things. But I also distinguish between anger and, say, rage or tantrums or vengeance. Those are different. Anger you can tell anger apart from these things because there is a constructive element to it rather than a destructive element. And when I'm not saying that it doesn't necessarily destroy a bad relationship, but that can definitely be an effect. But what it really does is it gives you a sense of how to move, an understanding that you need to move forward in some way, and it gives you a sense of what direction you need to move in to do right by yourself.
Yeah, I think that, again, I'm going to go back to this idea that it is inherently so respectful to use your anger and say, I'm going to give this person feedback and give them the opportunity to try to repair this relationship. I speak a lot, and I spoke at a school, and they wanted me to come back. And they said, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but last year when you spoke, you get really passionate, you talk really fast. We really want you back, but we want you to like talk a little slower and like give, put less ideas into a talk. And I was like, thank you. That's feedback. That I'm not taking it the wrong way at all, because you're not like, oh, we're just not having her back. She talked too fast. You're like, you're telling me how to fix it. That's respectful. That's helpful. I just think, going to like all the voices about how estrangement is about like disrespect or treating relationships as disposable. Have you ever met anybody who like just estranged on a whim or disposable or like disrespectfully, like, I don't care anymore?
I have never met one such person, and I have talked to easily, 100 survivors of abuse and estrangers, and there's a huge overlap between the two, I would say. It is always, whether you did it my way or you did it your way with your relative that you were talking about before, or all of the other different ways that you can do it. No matter how you did it, it is, even if it's an aha moment. When I stepped away from my mother, it was on a phone call where she broke a rule for the 47,000th time, and I realized that she just wasn't going to change. So that was an aha moment, but it was the product of 2 years of work, hundreds of years of conversation. Hundreds of conversations on my part with her before I came to that so-called aha moment. I think one of the myths about estrangement is that, just as you were saying, the people who step away are selfish or self-centered or impulsive. But in fact, what we're almost invariably doing is stepping away from people who are selfish, self-centered, and impulsive.
Yeah. To me, it's usually about ignoring the fundamentals of boundaries. And it's usually, I actually wrote a little adult fairy tale. I call it The Fable of Mrs. McGillicuddy, where Mrs. McGillicuddy had a tomato patch in front of her house, and she had a little string around it, and then people started trampling through it. So she put up a little sign saying, like, I love that your kids are running in front of my house, but can you please make sure they don't go into my tomato patch, because I really value my prized tomatoes. And people were ignoring it, so she put up a little bit of a fence, and people were ignoring it, so eventually put up a big brick wall. And then everyone got mad because she's obstructing the view in the neighborhood, and she just suddenly on a whim decided to put up this brick wall. Had you respected the string, she wouldn't have had to put up the fence, right? Like, usually to me, boundaries are how we protect relationships. And if you want a relationship with someone who's going lower contact or voting with their feet, respect their boundaries. They'll come back, right? They'll renegotiate a relationship with you, repair it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, rarely do people start out thinking, "Oh, I just want to be done with this." I think they end up that way oftentimes, but there's always signals that prefigure the moment that the person who's estranged from identifies as the sudden move, the impulse,
Right.
The inexplicable impulse. They're so focused on the tip that they don't realize there's a whole iceberg underneath. There's always an entire iceberg under that tip.
Yeah. Yeah, and the tip may be the first time that person was conscious of it, but the iceberg was always there.
That's right.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's so true that, like, I know in my own experience, I've worked with some families that have gone, I would say, lower contact than perhaps, the parent would have liked. Always, when that person is willing to hear the feedback and willing to work on the repair, just work on it. Not necessarily change overnight, right? Start the learning process. Their adult children are willing to do that, in my experience, in my clinical practice. But that's only when there's that sense of like, oh, there's feedback here. Let me learn from it. Let me renegotiate this relationship, right? The onus of us as the adult parents, like I'm a parent of adult children, right? My onus is always to be the adult in the room. And the adult in the room is the one who usually takes responsibility for the repair and for tending to the relationship. That's always going to be my job with my relationship with my adult kids.
Right. And I strongly agree. I feel that we as parents, even when if we're 100 years old and our kid is 80 years old, we still occupy that parental role. We've lived 20 years longer. We have 20 more years experience that we can share with them. And then if they get to be 100, might be valuable to them. I think, have a duty to our kids to model behaviors for them as the relationship continues, as we're in our 60s and they're in their 30s or whatever. And in fact, so, going back to what you were talking about before, well, I think one of the other myths that we're sold is that we owe our parents under any circumstances, that there's nothing that they can do that would warrant us stepping away from them because they gave us life, they raised us, they did whatever. In fact, in my opinion, there are many things that a parent can do to lose that privilege of connection with us. I think when people grow up, they one of the milestones of adulthood, like getting your first apartment or moving in with your first partner, should be choosing your family. And we all have, as humans, have an amazing capacity as a species to choose our family, to make family out of strangers. Band of brothers, you hear that from soldiers all the time. People in kibbutzim, people in fraternities, sports teams, religious cults. We can make family out of almost any group of strangers. And that kind of family, which, a lot of us call chosen family or logical family, tends to get short shrift. And to me, that's my real family. My sister is part of that real family. And some of my, uncles and cousins and aunts are part of that real family. But it's my friends, it's people who've been there for me. And, people I didn't know 10 years ago or 5 years ago are now part of my chosen family. And I'm part of my son's chosen family. I have earned that privilege, and that to me is maybe the thing I'm most proud of in my life.
Yeah, it's true. To me, it feels like the best testament to like, I did this. My damage didn't damage my kids, is that my adult children have a good relationship with me, like a good enough, healthy adult, not child, but adult relationship with me. And that to me is always going to be the sort of proof of concept, right? Like I'm a more confident parent now than I was when I started out with my younger kids, because I do have adult children and I know that they want a relationship with me. In fact, I was working with a family where the children had gone lower contact than the mom appreciated. And at one point, the mom of this family said to me, well, one day you'll be my age and your children will set boundaries against you and you'll understand what I feel. And I looked at her. I happened to look very young for my age. I looked at her and I said, I actually have adult children and they do have boundaries with me, not against me. Boundaries are with. Boundaries are co-negotiated, and boundaries are what protect relationships. They're not what stop relationships. And I'm so glad I do, because I don't want to call my adult daughter and her to be gritting her teeth and letting me spew because she needs to. But really, it's a bad time for her. And when I hang up, she thinks like, oh, thank God that's over. I want her to, if she calls me or if I call her, that it's at a moment when we mutually want to connect and the conversation feels good to both of us, right? That's boundaries with, not boundaries against.
You're here.
And I feel like, there's so much rhetoric around estrangement that makes it sound like boundaries are the first step towards, not caring about family, when no, boundaries should, as you said in the book, like, I wouldn't let anyone treat me this way. Like, no one has the right to berate me.
Yeah. I mean, the most important sentence in the book, and there are other sentences that I hope people will read as well, but the one most important sentence for me, and that was also instrumental in me starting on this road towards stepping away and saving my life, really, is the notion that we should hold our family to the same standards that we hold our friends. Most of us, there's people pleasing, there's definitely stuff like that we fall prey to because of our backgrounds. But generally speaking, we can distinguish between the behavior that our abuser inflicts on us and the way other people behave towards us. As I said earlier, for me, it was the realization that nobody in the world treated me as badly as my mother did. That got me started thinking about how to compare that relationship with other relationships and whether it lived up to other relationships and what she had to do to change that relationship.
Yeah. I love that, you end the book on this note of, I actually teared up when you wrote about your son being interviewed, about being basically the person who brought sumo to New York, and the podcaster asked him, this is a spoiler for people who haven't read the book, but the podcaster asked him, what's your number one piece of advice for people who want to do what you did? And he said, have a great dad. And I just teared up because that was exactly what post-traumatic parenting is, right? Like when your damage doesn't damage your kids.
Yeah, and so thank you for bringing that up. It's that's the best gift that Oscar has ever given me, and a gift. I teared up now just when you were mentioning that, and that was something that was I didn't see coming. I didn't imagine that I had earned it. I suppose on some level I did. I had just given him some help and encouragement with this project that he had when he wanted to start. He loves Japanese culture. He's not a classically built sumo wrestler, but he's in the lightweight division. And he wanted to spar with people. And he realized, my God, the one thing New York doesn't have is a sumo club. You can go and sort of learn about the sport and practice it. And he started it. And I helped him, initially. We had a little sparring in Prospect Park in Brooklyn, and I broke my toe. So that was my last sumo match. But Oscar's gone on and done hundreds more. And the New York Sumo Club that he founded, shout out to New York Sumo Club, NY Sumo Club on Instagram, it's been 3 years, and it's a going concern. He's got endorsement deals. He's doing all sorts of stuff. And when he was interviewed about it, the notion that I had any kind of role to play in his success, such that he would say what he said that you just described, it's the thing it's the thing I'm most proud of.
Yeah, I mean,
you go.
Yeah, I think it echoes back to me the conversation you had with your mom, where she said, like, why are you majoring in English? What are you going to do? Open a word store? And like, yeah, that's what you did. You opened a word store. It's the exact parallel opposite, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I hadn't thought of it in exactly that sense, comparing the two against each other. But you're right. It is an indication of how far I came from the way I was parented. And again, it's not because I'm super dad. It's because, and your work is wonderful proof of this. It's because it is actually not only possible, but likely, if we put our backs and our hearts into it, it is likely that we can break the cycle with our kids. Or if we decide not to have kids because we don't want to run the risk that we might treat them the way we were treated. But especially if we have children of our own, we have the capacity to end however many decades or centuries of maltreatment was handed down to us. That's sort of triumphant.
Yeah. And then the fact that it heals us as well, right, is just like, I think we do it for the sake of our kids, but we don't realize that we were doing it for the sake of our own inner child. Like, for me at least, it was easier to focus on, I need to heal for these little humans that have no one else, like I'm the only mom, right? I'm the only mom in town for them. Like this is it. But then it healed me. That I think I didn't expect.
That's a great thing about parenthood too, in these circumstances too, is it can be very hard for us to think in terms of doing something for ourselves. Self-care can feel like selfishness to us because we know the selfishness of our abusers. So if we can tell ourselves, and of course it's true, that we're doing this for our kids, we will in the end benefit from it ourselves, but it's an easy way in for us in psychic terms to doing the work that we do want to do. And the therapy that I've been in for 14, 15 years now has definitely made me a better dad, among other things.
Yeah. Shout out to that hard work of therapy, right? That in the end is so valuable. So as we conclude, I think that this is going to be such a great episode for all the post-traumatic parents, because I think your book really, like I said, it just opened a door to something that needed to be said and that needed to even just be entertained, that, this is an option towards your healing. I feel like so many, when your book came out, we had so many conversations about it in the post-traumatic parenting community. And so I'm just so glad we're talking now. Where can the people who don't know you find you?
Easiest place to find me is Instagram. I'm moderately obsessive about posting there. So there's all sorts of news about my book and about my photos, as you kindly mentioned before, and the rest of my life, my wonderful wife, my wonderful son, my chosen family. That is my name at Eamon Dolan, EAMONDOLAN on Instagram. If you want to find out about the book, it is available in all the great and good bookstores of the world, online, offline. If you want a quick rundown of what's in the book and what people have said about the book, you can go to the website that I believe you're going to list, which is my publisher's website, Penguin Random House, and then the book, and they say lots of nice things about it in there.
Yeah. And it's also available in audio, because I know we're always talking in the post-traumatic parenting community how, like, we don't have time to read, but you can always listen. And you narrated it beautifully. It was, really, really enjoyable to, listen to it. And like I said, I have both copies. I have it in audio. I have it in physical. So, but but it was a fantastic, fantastic book. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Robin. And thanks to your viewers and your listeners, and to all the people who need this book and have been helped by it, and I hope there will be many more. With your help, there will be. I'm really grateful for this conversation.
I'm here on social media to be descriptive, not prescriptive. I'm here to educate, inform, and hopefully entertain, but never to treat. If listening to this podcast helps you realize that you need therapy, I am all for that. But podcasts aren't therapy. Please reach out to a mental health professional licensed in your jurisdiction. You'll be glad you did. Wish post-traumatic parenting was a talk show, not a podcast? You have a question for me or for my guests? Great news. You can ask those questions by following me on Instagram. My handle is @DrKoslowitz Psychology. It's also in the show notes. I love it when people reach out, DM, or post a question. Who knows, your question might spark an entire episode. Come join our community. We get it. We're post-traumatic parents too. Can't wait to hear from you.